The NBA just declared war on the WNBA, and Caitlin Clark is the weapon they used to do it. Before we get into this, I need you to stay with me until the very end, because the last name on this list, nobody is talking about it. And when you hear what he actually said, or rather what he refused to say, you'll understand that this was never just about basketball. There's a power play happening right now at the highest level of this sport, and Caitlin Clark is sitting right in the middle of it, whether she wants to be or not. Don't go anywhere. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. We cover the stories the mainstream sports media is too scared to touch, and this one goes deep. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's get into it. The NBA verdict: every superstar's take on Caitlin Clark ranked from real to ruthless. Something has been happening inside professional basketball this season that nobody in the league office wants to admit out loud. The most talked about player in the sport right now doesn't play in the NBA. She plays in the WNBA. She's in her second year. She gets shoved, elbowed, hip-checked, and bodied on nearly every screen she runs. And for months, the people whose job it is to protect her said almost nothing. The whistles came late. The reviews went quiet. The analysts on the desk talked around it. Fans were on social media every single night asking the same question. When is someone actually going to speak up? And then it happened. But here's the twist. It wasn't the WNBA commissioner. It wasn't the players' union. It wasn't some beat reporter finally growing a spine. It was the NBA. One by one, the biggest names in men's basketball started going on record. Some defended her like she was family. One compared her shooting mechanics directly to his own. A few went suspiciously quiet, and at least two delivered answers so calculated, so deliberate that the silence around them felt louder than anything they said. What followed was a public referendum, and it split the basketball world clean down the middle. By the time we get to the last name on this list, you'll know exactly who's in Caitlin Clark's corner, who's pretending she doesn't exist, and why every single one of these answers reveals something much bigger about where this sport is actually heading. Let's go. Pascal Siakam, the unexpected flag planter. Pascal Siakam was supposed to give the boring answer. That's how it normally works. The reporter sticks a microphone in your face, asks something soft about another league, you say something polite and forgettable, and everybody moves on with their day. Siakam had every reason to play it that way. He's a champion. He's an all-star. He's one of the most fluid two-way forwards in the league right now, and he doesn't strike you as someone chasing viral clips. So when a reporter asked him which player in basketball right now commands the most love from the public, nobody in that room was ready for what came next. He didn't pick a teammate. He didn't pick someone from his own conference. He didn't even pick someone from his own league. He picked Caitlin Clark. And he didn't just drop the name and move on. He stacked her directly against Tyrese Halliburton, his own co-star, the man he shares a locker room with every night, one of the most marketable point guards in the NBA right now, and said the love around Caitlin was on another level entirely. Read that back slowly. A Finals MVP candidate just told the world that a second-year WNBA guard carries more genuine public affection than one of his own league's brightest stars. That's not a throwaway compliment. That's a man standing in front of a microphone and telling you the gravitational center of basketball has shifted. And the new center isn't in the NBA. Siakam didn't have to say any of that. He chose to. He planted a flag. And once that flag was in the ground, every other player had a decision to make. Obi Toppin, the quote everyone missed. Obi Toppin doesn't do monologues. Anyone who's watched him play or talk knows his energy: loose, joyful, swagger at the rim, quick answers, then he's gone. So, when someone asked him about Caitlin Clark, you expected maybe 30 seconds and a smile. What you got was something different. His tone changed mid-answer. The bravado dropped, and he started talking about her not like a celebrity he happened to spot courtside, but like a peer he genuinely respects. He said she's amazing. He said it's something special watching her study the game from the sideline at their games. And then he said the Pacers do the exact same thing when they watch her play. Same energy, same excitement, same admiration running in both directions. That last part is what everybody missed. He wasn't doing a shout-out. He was describing a mutual relationship. He was telling anyone paying attention that inside his corner of basketball, the NBA and the WNBA already see each other as equals. Caitlyn isn't visiting the cool kids table. She's already seated. The shift is subtle, but once you catch it, you can't unhear it. NBA players don't talk about women's basketball players like this. They talk about her like this. And the moment a superstar starts using the word we instead of they, the conversation is permanently changed. This quote barely trended. It barely made the rounds. The next one made sure everybody heard it. Stay with me because what Tyrese Haliburton said next isn't just a compliment, it's a claim about the entire hierarchy of basketball stardom, and it will change how you see this whole situation. The brother she never had. Tyrese Haliburton has a view of this situation that nobody else does. He plays in Indianapolis. He lives in the same city she calls home during the season. He's run into her at events, had conversations, watched the media storm surround her from closer than almost any other player in the NBA without being on her team. So when the question came his way, he didn't reach for a press release. He talked like someone who had actually been watching. He said that in terms of fame, in terms of real cultural visibility among currently active basketball players anywhere in the world, Caitlin Clark is probably in the top 5. Not top 5 in the WNBA. Not top 5 among women athletes. Top 5, period, full stop, in the whole sport. That bracket includes LeBron. That bracket includes Steph Curry. That is the absolute peak of what professional basketball recognition looks like. And Haliburton wasn't being poetic. He framed it as something measurable, something he can observe every single day just by living in the same city. But what hit even harder was what he said after. He talked about the rhetoric, the noise, the constant swirl of controversy that follows her into every arena, every interview, every moment she exists in public. And he pointed out, almost like an older brother who's been watching from the hallway, how remarkable it is that she handles it the way she does. That's not a basketball take. That's empathy. He wasn't just rating her game, he was defending her humanity. And the people inside her own league still haven't done that publicly. There's a quiet kind of courage in saying what Haliburton said. Most NBA players understand the unwritten rule. You don't wade into another league's drama. You stay in your lane. He crossed it anyway. And when he did, the door wasn't just open anymore. It was off the hinges. LeBron James, when the king speaks, the whole sport listens. When LeBron James decides to weigh in on something, the thing he's weighing in on is permanently changed. He doesn't react. He confirms or rejects. He elevates or buries. His words don't just reflect the conversation. They redirect it. So, when he chose to talk about Caitlin Clark, he didn't take the easy road. He started with the noise. He said, everybody is looking for her to slip, looking for a quote they can slice and reframe into a negative. He's lived that for 2 decades straight. The most overanalyzed athlete in the history of American sports looked at what she's going through and recognized it immediately. Then he pointed to something most people glossed right over. He brought up the fact that the WNBA flew on chartered planes for the first time in league history during her rookie season. Private flights. A complete operational overhaul of how an entire professional league travels. And he said it the way a veteran says something that only veterans understand. Because everyone inside basketball knows what that actually means. That shift doesn't happen because a league suddenly found budget money. It happens when one player generates so much demand, so much economic pressure that the entire infrastructure has to evolve just to keep up with her. LeBron wasn't praising her jump shot. He was crediting her with moving an industry. That is a legacy language. That is how you talk about someone who bent the arc of a sport. When LeBron speaks about you in those terms, the entire sports world stops scrolling. Hold on, because right here is where the tone of this whole story starts to shift. The next voice came with a challenge. The one after that came with something much colder. And what those two answers reveal about the NBA's internal politics around Caitlin Clark is something nobody in mainstream sports media wants to say directly. The challenge that revealed real respect. Trae Young is not shy. He pulls up from the logo on hostile courts and then shushes the crowd. He treats road games like his personal stage. He is constitutionally incapable of backing down from a moment. So, when someone brought up the idea of a three-point contest between him and Caitlin Clark, he didn't hesitate. He said yes immediately. But, the part that mattered came right after. He brought up a stat. And not a vague, feel-good kind of stat, a specific, documented, historically significant one. He and Caitlin Clark are the only two players in the entire history of NCAA Division I basketball, men's or women's, to lead the country in both points and assists in the same season. That's not trivia. That's the basketball aristocracy. Two players who broke college basketball in the exact same way, from completely different sides of the sport. The fact that Trae knew that stat cold, ready to deploy it in an interview without hesitation, tells you everything about how closely he's actually been paying attention. And then he said something that landed differently than anything else in the interview. He said if they actually ran the contest, he'd need to practice a lot more than he had been lately. That's the tell. One of the most dangerous shooters on earth just publicly acknowledged that going up against Caitlin Clark wouldn't be a guaranteed win. That's not something you say about someone you see as beneath you. That's what you say about a peer you genuinely have to prepare for. Trae Young admitted on record that she scares him a little. From him? That might be the highest compliment in this entire list. Paul George, the most honest answer of all. Paul George doesn't do fluff. He's been in the league long enough to understand exactly how interviews work, how a stray phrase becomes a week of controversy, how every answer gets weaponized by somebody somewhere. So when he talks about something, he's thought about it first. His take on Caitlin Clark was unlike anyone else's. He didn't hype her up. He didn't compare her to a historical great. He zoomed out and asked the entire sports world to actually understand the moment they were living in. He fully acknowledged her as a genuine cultural shift. Not just for women's basketball, but for the sport broadly. No question about that. But then he did something most people don't have the patience or the courage to do. He talked about the veterans. The women who played in half-empty arenas for a decade. The ones who lobbied for charter flights and got nothing. The ones who spent years fighting for sponsorships, for recognition, for a seat at the table. And then watched all of it skip right over them and land in the lap of a rookie. He didn't excuse the resentment. He made you understand it. He humanized it. And what he was describing, that generational tension between players who built the foundation and never got to enjoy the view from the top of the building, explains something about this season that the league office has never been willing to say out loud. Some of the physicality directed at Clark on the court has roots in exactly that kind of friction. Not villain stuff. Human stuff. Complicated, painful, real stuff. Paul George was the only person at the NBA level willing to name it directly. That took something. And it set up the next answer perfectly. Because the next superstar who spoke wasn't interested in nuance at all. Luka Doncic. 2 words, 0 debate. Luka Doncic does not manage his image in interviews. He doesn't perform for cameras. He doesn't soften answers to protect feelings. He doesn't worry about optics. He says what he thinks, and then he goes back to thinking about basketball. When a reporter asked him who his favorite women's basketball player was, the answer came out exactly the way every Luka answer comes out. Flat, direct, final. Caitlin Clark. That was it. Then the reporter, clearly trying to open things up a bit, pivoted to Paige Buchers, expecting Luka to spread the praise around. He didn't. He said Paige was fine, and then, with that unmistakable Luka shrug in his voice, added that he hadn't really seen her play in the WNBA yet. That last sentence went viral immediately. And people got it wrong. He wasn't taking a shot at Paige. He was doing something much more specific. He was drawing a line between potential and production, between hype and proof, between college stardom and showing up every night against grown professionals while taking elbows you didn't earn. There's a code in basketball. Hoopers know it without having it explained. You respect the one doing it at the highest level consistently under the hardest conditions. Right now, in his eyes, that player is Caitlin Clark. Luka had zero political reason to single her out, no incentive, no upside. He just did because in his mind, the answer was obvious. We're getting close to the end of this list. And the last two names, they might be the most important ones. Not because of what they said, but because of what they chose not to say. Stay right here. Steph Curry, the greatest shooter alive, just looked in a mirror. There's a quote that has been circulating on social media for months attributed to Steph Curry, where he reportedly expressed genuine frustration about the physicality directed at Clark and called on the league to protect her. The energy behind that quote is real. It captures something true about how Curry has positioned himself in this whole conversation. Whether or not those exact words came out in exactly that form, what's verified and what went even further is the technical breakdown he gave of her actual game. He said her release time on her jump shot is essentially identical to his own. Let that land. The greatest shooter in the history of basketball, the man who completely rewired what's possible from three-point range, the player who made an entire generation of kids pick up the ball differently. He looked at Caitlin Clark's mechanics and said she's doing what he does. That is not a participation trophy. That is a handoff from one generation to the next. That is the kind of compliment you give to someone you see carrying the torch forward. And he kept going. He talked about her range, her confidence. He called her a performer, and the way he said it made it clear that was the highest thing he could say about someone in basketball. He said when she plays, you can't help but watch. That's what people have been saying about Steph Curry for 15 years. Then, in a detail that Hoopers immediately locked onto, he said her floor game was just as impressive as her shooting. The passing, the court vision, the things that don't show up on casual highlight reels. That's a basketball mind recognizing another basketball mind. And Clark returned the energy publicly. When Curry was getting grabbed and held by defenders earlier this year, she jumped on social media and told the world to let Steph cook. Let him shoot his threes. Stop grabbing him. Analysts immediately noticed the irony. She was talking about him. She was also talking about herself. They both know that life. And they've been quietly nodding at each other from across the basketball universe ever since. For a moment, it genuinely felt like the entire NBA was standing behind her. And then, two of the biggest names in the sport reminded everyone it wasn't that simple. Jason Tatum, the loudest silence in sports. Jason Tatum was handed the easiest question of his entire press season. Who's your favorite WNBA player? That's it. That's the whole question. A layup. A gift. Every NBA star gets this question in some form now, and almost all of them use the moment to throw some energy behind the women's game. Tatum looked at the question and said two words. Aya Wilson. No context, no follow-up, no other name mentioned. That was the complete answer. Now, Aya Wilson is one of the most dominant players in the history of women's basketball. Championships, MVPs, the whole thing. Nobody picking her is making an illegitimate choice. But this isn't about Aya Wilson. It's about what Tatum chose not to say. He had an opportunity, the kind of opportunity players are given on purpose to acknowledge the player who has single-handedly changed the financial trajectory of an entire league. The one who is filling arenas that used to be half empty. The one who is being physically targeted while the league office stays quiet. The one whose very existence is forcing every single person in basketball to take a position. He passed. Not with a critique, not with a counter-argument, with silence. In a media environment where every word becomes a story, silence carries its own message. The people watching at home noticed. Social media dissected the clip. There's been speculation, unverified but persistent, about whether there's something more deliberate running underneath that answer. Tatum hasn't addressed it. So, all of that remains in the realm of reading between the lines. But, the optics stuck. And then, someone much bigger made an even louder choice. The pick that said everything without saying anything. Kevin Durant has one of the largest microphones in professional basketball, and he has spent 20 years understanding exactly how to use it. Every tweet ripples. Every podcast appearance gets analyzed. Every passing comment in a tunnel after a game gets a column written about it somewhere. So, when someone asked him which female athlete he was riding with right now, he knew the entire basketball world was paying attention to whatever came next. He didn't say Caitlin Clark. He said Angel Reese. One name, no hesitation, no elaboration. Clean. Let's be clear about what that means and what it doesn't mean. Angel Reese is a legitimate WNBA player with real talent, real personality, and a genuine fan base. Nobody with a serious basketball brain disputes that. But the choice itself, in that specific moment, with everything swirling around Caitlin at that point in the season, was not a basketball answer. It was a cultural answer. Durant knew exactly what he was doing. He understood the rivalry framing that the media had built between the two players since college. He understood that picking Reese in that exact moment, in response to that exact question, would land as a deliberate signal rather than a neutral preference. Speculation has run wild since about whether he was sending a message to Caitlin, to her fan base, to the broader narrative around her. He hasn't clarified, so all of that stays speculation. What isn't speculation is the weight of the answer. When a player with Durant's gravity in the sport publicly elevates the player who has been positioned as Clark's biggest foil, while Clark is simultaneously carrying the WNBA's entire visibility on her shoulders, it sends a signal to everyone watching. It tells the people who've been questioning her that they have company at the highest level. It tells every narrative that's been built to push back against her that it isn't alone. It's a power move dressed as a casual opinion. And it landed exactly as intended. The verdict. Step back from the individual quotes. Look at the shape of the whole thing. NBA players, men with no obligation to discuss another league, no political incentive to wade into someone else's drama, no upside in commenting on another organization's problems, chose to speak anyway. Pascal Siakam stacked her against his own co-star and said the love for her was on another level. Obi Toppin called her a peer and described a mutual relationship of respect between two leagues that used to barely acknowledge each other existed. Tyrese Halliburton put her in the top 5 most famous active basketball players in the entire world, NBA included. LeBron James credited her with reshaping the physical infrastructure of a professional sports league. Trae Young said he'd have to genuinely train if they ever ran a shooting contest against each other. Paul George explained the generational tension surrounding her with more honesty and nuance than anyone inside her own league has been willing to attempt. Luka Doncic gave her the only compliment that actually matters to a hooper. He said her name without being asked twice. And Steph Curry, the man who redefined what a shooter can be, looked at her mechanics and said she's doing what he does. Then there's the other side. Tatum, who answered with 2 words and said nothing more. Durant, who picked the one name engineered by the media to stand in opposition to everything Clark represents. 2 answers that, in the silence around them, said as much as everything else combined. Here's what makes this moment historically different from every other hype cycle in basketball. Caitlin Clark isn't just generating support. She's forcing decisions. Players who would normally say nothing are being pushed to pick a side because the cultural pressure around her is too enormous to dodge. She is the rare athlete whose mere presence in a league has become a referendum on everything. Physicality, marketing, media coverage, race, gender, generational respect, money, power. All of it knotted together in one player. And the way the NBA's biggest names are responding tells you exactly how serious that pressure has become. The most remarkable part is that she's only in year 2. She has already broken viewership records. She has already sold out arenas that used to pump and fake crowd noise. She has already pulled in millions of casual fans who never watched a single women's basketball game before she arrived. She has already survived a season of physical play that would have ended most players' momentum before it ever built. And the most important thing for everyone watching this story unfold, she is just getting started. So, the next time someone tries to tell you Caitlin Clark is a moment, a media creation, a temporary rating spike, a story that will fade when the next thing comes along. Remember this list. Remember that LeBron, Steph, Luka, Trey, Pascal, Obi, Paul George, and Tyrese Halliburton all looked at what was happening and chose to put their names on the record. Remember that even the ones who went quiet said something loud by saying nothing at all. That is not a flash in the pan. That is a fault line running through the entire sport. The NBA has made its position clear on Caitlin Clark. The only question left is whether her own league is finally going to have the courage to do the same. Drop your take in the comments right now. Who gave the realest quote and who do you think deliberately dodged the moment? Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and don't miss the next one.